where we are in college football. Because this national championship, I think, gives us a pretty good gauge for the competitive landscape. Because how often did you hear something like this? Hey, to win a national title, you have to have X amount of 5 stars. To win a national title, you have to have X amount of resources or recruiting prowess or whatever kind of label you want to put to it. That was always sort of the ceiling that people put over winning a national title. And that's not to say there weren't still examples that supported that thesis, but I think the more that we've bumped up against this ceiling as the college football public and seen the different national championship matchups we've had throughout the course of this 4-team playoff, you start to knock on that ceiling and say, hey, wait a second. This ceiling's made of glass. It would just take one team to punch through that thing and prove that it is, in fact, not a real barrier to winning a national championship. Like, you look at where these teams are and how they've recruited, because remember, that was a big thing people said. You got to have a certain pedigree of talent, have to be over a certain place in the talent threshold to win a national title. Y'all, if Washington wins the national championship, they will have done it with an average class ranking when it comes to the recruiting trail the last 4 years of 36. They will have averaged a 36 class ranking if they win the national title. Now, Michigan, bigger brand, more resources, so there is a little bit more legitimacy to the ceiling we've put on the national title, or national championship winners, rather, over the last couple of years. But you look at what they've done. The last 4 years, they've been outside the top 10 in terms of their average class ranking. They've had a couple of classes be at 9. They had a class at 10. But overall, like, they're sitting there right around 13 is where Michigan would sit. So everyone telling you got to recruit at the top 3 level to win a national title, it gets you in the building, but you have to actually play the games as well. And we look at what's happened the last couple of years, too. You've had TCU in the national championship. They got boat raced. I understand that they were still in there. Still beat a Michigan team. You had Cincinnati, a G5 team at that point in time, make the college football playoff. Again, I'm telling you, this ceiling, it's glass. Just because those teams haven't won the national title doesn't mean they weren't in position to compete for it, because they absolutely were by nature of them making the college football playoff. Why both these teams are here, yes, they've recruited to a certain degree and used the portal really well. I mean, that's quite frankly why Washington is in this game, in my estimation. I don't think you get to this game without Michael Penix Jr., but they've developed extremely well also. That's also a major factor as to why they're in this game. They've done more with, and I hate to say this, but they've done more with less in a lot of ways. And when it comes to strategy and scheme, they've knocked it out of the park. And that's been a case study in this year. So again, big college football has told us, hey, you gotta have a little bit more balance across the landscape. That's why we're going to a 12-team playoff. You know, the big boys are always in it. You hear people say this all the time. Well, the same 4 teams always make it. No, they have not. The same 4 teams do not always make it. In fact, we've never had the same 4 teams in the college football playoff. In fact, we had TCU, Cincinnati, and now we got Washington in the dance. Like, no, there's not this imbalance of power. I think there's this imbalance in how we view some of these teams when it comes to resources. And again, I'm not trying to paint this picture that it's just an even playing field across the board. But just because some of these teams haven't won the national title and a lot of these SEC teams are consistently in it, doesn't mean that we need to just drastically change the sport and that somehow college football is in a bad place when it comes to the competitive landscape. And I think the thought for me, when it comes to a team like Washington, if they are to win the national championship, feels a lot like Roger Bannister when he broke that 4-minute mile barrier. Like, it was perceived that if you broke a 4-minute mile, if you ran 3:59, your heart would stop and you would die. That was what we thought before it happened. Thought it was impossible. Then Roger Bannister goes 3:59 and some change on the mile, and now you have like that essentially being the standard for the mile when it comes to, world-class athleticism. I'm telling you, the glass ceiling has been cracked a few times, but especially Washington and maybe Michigan to some degree. I think they have more resources and a higher talent level than probably would serve to make a statement on that. But if Washington wins the national title, there's glass all over the place because they will have broken that ceiling. So, where is college football? I think the point I'm trying to make here when we point to the national title game is that as a competitive landscape, we're in a great spot. That there's not this major imbalance of power. Is there an imbalance of resources? Maybe so. But resources only get you in the building. You still have to actually play the game and kick the door down to get to where you want to go. So college football overall, like the health of the sport, man, we are in a great spot. We're in a great spot. Ratings, up. Attendance across the board, up. We're paying players in NIL. Y'all, that's a good thing. It was a travesty when you had someone like Johnny Manziel not making money above board for his name, image, and likeness. Just like it made absolutely zero sense for a school to sell a player's jersey with their number on it. Everyone knows whose jersey they're purchasing, but the player sees exactly $0 from that. Y'all, this is a good thing. We're moving in the right direction when it comes to the college football world. At the exact same time, I think the structure we have in place with college football, as we evolve and change with more horsepower, I think we have to change the apparatus around that horsepower. Because like I just said, intrigue, the portal, I think to some degree there's pros and cons as there is with any major changes in the college football landscape. With all of this intrigue and money and all these things that are now funneling into college football at an alarming rate, TV contracts, conference realignment, all of that, we need to find some ways to make sure that we don't overheat the machine. Because the product, I think, is great. It's great. As long as we have Saturday afternoons, 11-on-11 football, and we kick off anywhere in Tuscaloosa, Austin, Texas, Auburn, Alabama, like, go ahead and name a destination in the college football world. As long as they're playing 11-on-11 ball, I'm here for it. The product's going to be great. It's only going to, I think, continue to be intriguing as we continue to use the transfer portal and NIL and all those things. But there's an obvious need for change at the exact same time. Like, I was at the personnel symposium, I guess it was 2-ish years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, and the sentiment across the board was the same. Hey, we are going to lose good people in this profession, in the personnel world and in the college football world, because the calendar does not make sense. It doesn't make sense. And the people creating the calendar, they don't have an adequate gauge for what the day-to-day is like in our world. Our world, again, speaking to the personnel world and the college football world, period. Like, you got people working 358 days a year. It's not sustainable. What's going to happen is we're going to have people that have their values in a solid place, that care about more than just college football and care about their families and their own well-being and their own health. And they're going to go to the NFL because those jobs, I would imagine, pay as much, if not more. You have an off season. You're not working around the clock on the recruiting calendar. Like, there has to be some changes. And it's not just the personnel world speaking out against it. Kirby Smart spoke out against it on his very first national championship post-game presser the morning after. Did a hit with ESPN, I believe it was, and he basically said, we're going to lose people. We got to make changes here. Lane Kiffin has got the portal in a sleeper hold. He's dominating the transfer portal. And he's out here saying, look, we got to change something. This isn't working. This isn't going to be a sustainable model here. So what I'm trying to say is, as good as I think the portal is, as good as I think NIL is, as good as, there may be some as good as the benefits are from the conference expansion and realignment and all of those things, there has to be some calibration here for us to get the sport to the right spot. And I'll be the first one to say it too. I don't like a lot of the changes when it comes to conference realignment, when it comes to college football playoff expansion. Like, I'm not for it. But again, as long as we're playing 11-on-11, I'll be here for it. We'll talk about it. It'll help us transparently. I've said that many times on this show. Like, the college football playoff expansion is going to be great for the media world. I mean, that in terms of intrigue around the sport and the content, like, that's going to be off the charts. So it helps us. I'm all about that. But the sport itself, need to tinker with it a little bit on the recruiting calendar. And think about this too. We will be several weeks into a college football playoff at this point in time next year. Like, the people that are hustling behind closed doors, they're working all the way through this thing, as they are right now with the transfer portal. But I'm just saying, that's another layer to throw into this thing. So here's what I think is going to happen when it comes to the next steps. It's very obvious, as the machine continues to overheat, at some point we're going to reach a point where we have to fix the machine, right? And it may not be all at once. It might be several years in the making. It might not happen until, 2030. But the reality for me is, one, has to be a restructuring of the calendar. We have to find a way to keep the right people in college football. Because over time, it's not just going to be the personnel departments that start to leave. You're going to lose head coaches. You're going to lose people that are, dominating the sport right now. And they say, you know what? This isn't the college football I signed up for. I'm going to go coach in the NFL. Or I'm just going to retire, period, and go hang out on a beach somewhere for a couple of years with my family. Like, that's what's going to happen. I think that would be a travesty, and I hope that doesn't happen. So in order to make that happen, we got to create some better buffer periods when it comes to the portal, when it comes to the recruiting calendar, when it comes to the visits. Like, all those things have to be reorganized because we're reorganizing the season. So we got to reorganize the calendar, in my opinion, to make it match. Other part of this, and we've talked about this a couple of times on this show, revenue sharing, especially with bowl games, I think is inevitable. And to be real, that would help everybody. Because if you are a power that be and you are benefiting financially from the TV product itself, and your pockets are, I suppose, trending with the benefit of your TV product or with the health of your TV product, your product is only as good as the players on the field. And if we got some of the best players in the country opting out of bowl games, then that product's going to suffer. And so I'm speaking specifically to bowl games, but I think it might be a thing that as we get further and further into this evolution of college football, it might have to stretch across the regular season or what have you. And I'm not saying guys are going to sit out regular season games, but I am saying it's going to behoove the powers that be to revenue share with players in order to keep the best players in college football happy and where we want them to be, which is on the field, especially in bowl games. Other part of this, there's more conference realignment coming. I think we all agree that. I think we all agree on that. There's too much unrest with the ACC. And this year probably was a boiling point. I understand there's a lot made about the grant of rights in Florida State. And we've said this a couple times on this show as well. Like, I would have a very difficult time believing that a legal document is so solid that the best lawyers money can buy can't find a way through it. Can't find a way to make sense of a document to where it's so ironclad to where we can't make the powers that be that are paying those lawyers get what they want. And the room is so small with the people making those decisions and having those conversations to where I don't think we get a ton of buzz out of those rooms. I think we kind of get the narrative that we are meant to be told. And then eventually what really happens a little bit later down the line. Like, I say this a lot, but the SEC and the early departure of Texas and Oklahoma from the Big 12 is a prime example. You got one Friday where the news breaks, hey, Oklahoma and Texas, they are not leaving for the SEC early. Print it wherever you want, shout it from the rooftops, put it on every broadcast. We did a YouTube video on it, I think like an hour after it happened or maybe less than that. And then a week to the day later, the news breaks, Oklahoma and Texas, they're leaving for the SEC early. Like, I really believe that we're going to be in a place here where Florida State, potentially Clemson, who knows about Miami, those big brands in the ACC, the ones that bring in the majority of the pie to that conference from a revenue standpoint, I think at some point in time they're going to say, hey, if we can figure it out from a legal standpoint, and I do think they can figure it out, I just have a hard time believing they can't, we're going to pivot. This isn't best for us, and we appreciate y'all, but like, there's real money being made in the Big Ten and the SEC. So where those schools land, I have no idea, but again, the conference realignment is going to continue to churn until we finally reach a place where there's not that unrest in the ACC for those schools. So where is college football? It's in a great spot. But the same thing can be said of it's in a great spot, but there's some changes that I think are still happening behind closed doors, and we'll, I'm sure, find out more about when those become a little bit more imminent. So college football, it's a great place to be right now, but there's also some very real changes that I wholeheartedly believe are on the way. Hey y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.